Hey, we are still in Genesis chapter 25. We are starting off with just the first half of that chapter. We're going to read verses 1 through 26 and we're going to discuss them. And then from there, we are going to jump into drill down on just one particular portion of a story because that's going to take us into the next couple of videos as we read through the rest of these passages of Genesis. So starting at Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 through 4, we see that Abraham took another wife. So in our prior reading, Sarah, his wife of so many years, has passed, and he has sent a servant out to go find a wife for his son Isaac, and he, over this time, takes another wife, whose name is Keturah, and Keturah gives him 6 sons. And these sons, we see, will come up again in later passages in the Bible that talk through who they are and the families that come from them. But God promised Abraham numerous. He promised him people. He promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the dust on the earth. And so one way to get these type of, this type of family size is to have several sons. And that's exactly what we see. So we do see that the blessing follows a particular son. It follows from Abraham to his son Isaac, and then from Isaac down. Ishmael is still his son. He still loves him. He is still connected to him. And we're going to talk about that now. So after these 4 sons are grown and moved away, it talks about who they are and who their children are. And in verse 5, it says, Abraham gave everything he had to Isaac. So all of these sons of his are all given something and sent away to go find their life and make their fortune and find wives and live in other areas of the country. But the land that he's on, the items that he owns, the property, the majority, his wealth, all of those things are given to his son Isaac, because Isaac is the promised son that he was given. And in verse 7, it says that Abraham lived to be 175 years old. And when he died, we see that he was buried in the same cave with his wife Sarah, the same land that he purchased. But we see in verse 9 that Isaac and Ishmael buried him. These 2 brothers came together, regardless of how their mothers felt about each other, regardless of their history, regardless of the age differences, regardless of everything else that went on. They loved their father and their father loved them, and they came together to bury their father. They are brothers and they love each other. We see that they came together. There's no arguing, no fighting, no things like that. And we will see difficult brother relationships very soon. And this, we're not seeing signs for that. So Isaac has come together with his brother Ishmael. They bury their father in the same place where their mother is buried. And we see in verses 12 through 17, we see that Ishmael has gone on with his life after everything happened with his mom and Sarah getting into whatever they got into, that Ishmael went on to go and have 12 sons, and they are princes in their own right. They are heads of tribes in the same way that we will see later that the blessing that follows Abraham, Isaac, and falls on the son Jacob will lead to 12 tribes as well. So God promised Hagar, Ishmael's mother, and promised Abraham that his son Ishmael would not be left out. While the blessing isn't his, while the promise isn't his, he would not be left out. He would absolutely 100% have his own birthright, his own legacy, his own promise, his own blessing. It would still rest on him. And we see that this is what happens here. And that Ishmael has these sons who are 12 princes. They are heads of tribes. They are important men. They are royalty in their own right. We see that they exist and live, and that the promise that God gave for Ishmael is in fact true. In verse 17, it says that Ishmael lived to be 137 years old. And it says that he died gathered to his people, meaning he wasn't, cast off. He wasn't exiled. He wasn't any of those things. He wasn't in a situation where his family wasn't talking to him and he was on his own. It was a very close space, and his family came to lay him to rest. He wasn't in bad sorts with anybody. He was peaceful even into his passing, which is always good. And so it talks about in 18 where his people settled. So what area his family had encompassed, so that when you're reading the Bible in later passages and later chapters, these people are descendants of Ishmael, and in these areas are descendants of Jacob and Isaac. These are descendants of these different groups. And we saw when Abraham left his people and traveled into these different lands that he was a foreigner. But these are the lands that they kind of claimed as their own and named the cities and towns for themselves. So in verse 19, we see the descendants of Isaac. Isaac is Abraham's son. Okay. And so when Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah. Rebekah is the same woman that the servant went to get. He prayed to God, and God delivered and brought her home to meet the husband that she was going to take. And so they're married, and she's barren. And at this point, he's happy and he loves his wife, but he understands that prayer changes things. And so he prays to God for his wife, and God grants his prayer. Prayer changes things. Isaac was raised under Abraham. Abraham had a close relationship with God, and he prayed, and his prayer did something. It's because he learned. So make sure we are teaching our children the power of prayer and teaching our children to pray for themselves, so that when they're older and we're not there, they can do it on their own. Even if they're younger and we're not there, they can do it on their own. Because sometimes you just need to reach out to God in prayer and just really tell him what you want and wait for the power of the Lord to move. But God grants Isaac's prayer here, and Rebekah conceives. And in verse 22, it says the children struggled within her. These children in her belly were at war. I've never carried multiple, so I don't know what it feels like, but I know what it feels like to have one little one in there kicking around and moving. So I can't imagine having 4 feet kicking and having 4 hands playing patty cake and whatever else. And it says that they struggled within her, and she complained to God and said, look, if it's going to be like this, why do I have to live? Like, how? This is so hard. She went and she prayed to God. Please tell me what it is I'm supposed to be doing, because they about to tear straight through my stomach. These babies are at war inside of me. This is uncomfortable, it's miserable, and I can't live like this. This is just too much, God. And so God answers her prayer. Sometimes the prayer that you pray gets you an answer that God has for you, even if it's not the answer that you're looking for. God didn't say, oh, no, let me settle them babies down. What he said is, you got 2 nations in your womb. You got 2 people that are going to be divided. And one is going to be stronger than the other, but the older will serve the younger. God gave her a promise, the same way he gave one to Hagar when she prayed about the baby that she was carrying, and she had that conversation with the angel. This is the same thing that happens here. God answers her and tells her, hey, you having twins. There's children in there. You got 2 people in there who have 2 very different personalities, and that they are going to be divided. They're not going to partner well. You're not going to have cute identicals that blend. You're going to have 2 different people. These are very fraternal children, and they're going to have their own path and their own future. And I know them already. I know their outcome already. And so in verse 24, it says, when it was time to give birth, there were twins. So God promised that there were children. God promised that there were 2 people who were going to be divided nations. And when she gives birth, there are in fact 2 children. And she said, and it says in verse 25, the first came out red. His body was a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Esau really just means that red coloring. But that red is he's hairy, he's thick, and he has coarser texture of hair. He has he's very pigmented. He's very pigmented. And so they named him Esau. And then afterwards, so his brother is born second. Remember, God said that the older would serve the younger. And so the younger is born second, with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he comes out literally holding on to his brother. And so he was named Jacob. Now, the meaning of Jacob is typically thief or usurper, somebody who was trying to take the spot. And so while they're naming him this is because he's holding on to his brother's heel as though he was trying to pull him back so that he could be the firstborn. He's trying to take his position. And it says that Isaac was 60 years old when she had these children. So they were married at 40. It took 20 years for them to conceive and to have a child. But God promised them something. And when they were born, they start to see the promise that God had given them. So we're going to cut here because this next one is a very specific thing and I want to talk all about it, but I don't want to cram everything in. So just a quick recap. Abraham has several children. There are sons that are spread across in different places. And Ishmael, we see, receives the promise that God gave him that he would also have princes, that he would also have nations that come from him, that there was a special blessing for him. Even though it wasn't the blessing, there was still a special blessing attached to his life because he didn't pick his parents. He didn't pick the situation. But God did see him because his father prayed earnestly for him. His father taught him God. His father still was a father to him, even though they were separated. The brothers come together at the end of Abraham's life and bury him. And we see after all of that, that Isaac has twins with his wife and they are born like night and day. One is, very, very, one is very hairy and red. He has a ruddy complexion. He's pigmented. And so they name him Esau. And then his brother comes out, and his brother is Jacob, who was born second. And he is born kind of gripping on his brother's foot so that he's born second, but it seems as though he's trying to pull his brother back. So what we see here is the first part of that promise that God provides, or that answer that God provides to Rebekah in verse 23, that there are two nations in your womb. There's two people being born. And they're going to be divided. That we're seeing the difference in the two even marked from their birth. One is going to be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger. So we're going to cut here and we're going to come back. But what I want us to remember is prayer changes things. Make sure that you are praying over these situations and that you are teaching your children to pray. You are teaching them so that they can pray on their own. Abraham taught his sons prayer. He taught his sons God. And when you give your children God and prayer, they are going to be able to stand on their own, even when you're not there. And that's what we see. We see Isaac stepping into this position of prayer and worship and understanding and communication with God that Abraham had. So we are going to cut here. But again, I thank you. You guys be blessed. And thank you for excusing the mess in the back. This right here is, we're going to call it a sneak peek for the new layout for our Bible studies that we have. I teach a class right now about reading and understanding the Bible, and I want to make sure that you get to see me doing my Bible study. So instead of just looking right here at me, you'll get to see all the books that are laid out in front of me, my notes and things like that, the tools that I use to be able to understand what it is that I understand. And so that way you can go home, you can copy it, you can see it, you can practice it, and you'll have access to the same information. And if you have any questions, I am always here. Drop me a comment. Welcome to send me a message. However it is that works for you, I want to make sure that you're able to contact me and we'll work it out together. So with all of that, y'all have a fantastic one. See you next time.